Hi everyone, and welcome to the DAM for Healthcare Day as part of DAM Industry Week 2022. I'd like to introduce our conference chair, Jared Gingras, Managing Director of Real Story Group. Over to you, Jared.
Thank you, Edward, and thank you all for joining us for the fifth and final day of the DAM Industry Week for 2022, sponsored by Henry Stewart Events. It's my pleasure to be hosting you all today for today's topic, which is DAM for Healthcare. Now, I know many of you come from the healthcare space and have been looking forward to this day, all week. I appreciate that, and I wanted to tell you we have a really exciting panel today. Of speakers from all sorts of different healthcare-related organizations like Roche, Genentech, Mayo Clinic, Headspace, Abbott Labs, and Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, and among others. And so I'm really excited for the program we have for you today. So again, thank you so much for being here. And if you are from another industry and are just attending today to learn some lessons from the healthcare space, you're in the right spot too, because there's so much to be learned from other industries, and healthcare is one that has some really unique challenges. Let's be honest, healthcare is different, and I think there's so much to be learned from healthcare to apply to other industries as well. Why is healthcare different? There's obviously intense regulatory issues that you need to navigate. There's, of course, privacy concerns and intense workflows that need to be followed so that assets can be approved in the proper ways before they see the light of day. And the assets themselves. These are complicated assets with complicated metadata needed to be assigned to them to truly manage them in a proper way. So lots of uniqueness as it relates to healthcare, but lots of lessons to be learned to apply to wherever your lives or however you interact with digital assets in your own world. So whenever I have the honor of hosting a day like today, I like to share with you this framework that we use at Real Story Group to assess where our clients are on their DAM journey. And I'm not going to go through this whole slide. It's a lot of text on this slide, but I just want to call your attention to these 4 different phases of digital asset management. And I think there's a couple different things that you can use this framework for. One is to do a bit of self-assessment. Where are you on your DAM journey? Are you just getting started with DAM? Are you a 1.0 organization where you've stood up a digital asset management system, but it's largely a standalone library? Are you a DAM 2.0 organization, where your DAM is integrated with some other systems, where DAM is powering other systems and before they get out to a number of channels? Or are you a DAM 3.0 organization where DAM is now part of an omni-channel content strategy, where you're thinking bigger than just traditional digital assets, and maybe you're starting to measure your asset effectiveness in a way where data is now flowing back into your content platform to help you make future decisions? Or maybe you're even at the cutting edge here, where you're thinking about a DAM 4.0 world, where you're thinking about how your content platform can predict results, predict the better performing assets, predict which content is going to work better in which contexts. This may sound very future looking to some of you, but I can assure you, for others on the call today and other clients that we're working with, this predictive notion of content is a very real phenomenon. The vendors are working to be your predictive content platforms, and buyers are starting to think about this, and some are getting very serious about this. So like I said, it's a good way to do a self-assessment, I think, but it's also a good way to kind of think about what's next. What's next on your enterprise's roadmap. So I hope that's helpful. If anyone wants to talk about this framework and where you all stand, feel free to reach out to me at Real Story Group. I'd love to talk about this further with you. So that brings us to our first presenter of the day. Christine Conley-Smith is from Roche Genentech. She's going to be talking about metadata. And I think it's a great way to kick things off, because as you look at these phases of DAM, as you get to the 2.0 world and the 3 and 4, connectivity among systems is vital. So integrations are vital. And for integrations to work, it's not just a technical problem. It's not just having APIs that allow one system to talk to another. Metadata is the language that ties everything together. It is the common language that we need to make sure that one system can talk to another system, so that your DAM can talk to the web content management system or the social publishing platform or the platform that we don't even know about yet. So metadata is critical. And as I mentioned earlier, in healthcare, metadata can be complicated, and making sure you have the right level of metadata in your organization and shared between systems is truly critical. So Christine from Roche Genentech, I'm going to welcome you to join us and start sharing your slides and take us away and share what's going on at Roche Genentech. So thank you, Christine. Thank you for being here. And thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Gerard. Let me just share that.
And while Christine is just getting started, I'll just invite everyone, as Christine is speaking today, feel free to enter any questions or that you have into the Q&A panel as part of the platform. And Christine's going to leave about 10 minutes at the end, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can, as time allows for at the end, and see what we can do from there. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks, Christine. Take it away.
Thanks, Gerard. And I couldn't have said it better, actually, in terms of, you'll hear this threaded throughout my presentation, that metadata really underpins a lot of that evolution of going from DAM 1.0 to DAM 4.0. And a lot of us want to be at 4.0 already, but we've got to do the groundwork, and it kind of starts with metadata. And hopefully you get that in my presentation today. And also, I have attended Henry Stewart DAM, being in the pharma industry over the years, and have gotten so much learning over how other people are managing metadata, even in other industries or sectors. So again, thank you. I'm delighted to be with you today, and want to share with you my perspective on why I think metadata is so important for connecting that overall content ecosystem from a content operations point of view. So I wanted to first start by saying it's really important to think about how we're socializing the business value of taxonomies and standardized metadata with our key stakeholders, like our key program stakeholders, those who are working in content, our channel stakeholders, and all the way from global to our affiliate stakeholders. So we want to start those conversations by saying, what is actually even meant by taxonomy in a pharma sector. I spent a lot of time in corporate IT and in medical and R&D, and when I came into the commercial space, specifically to lead in DAM, this word taxonomy was thrown around quite a bit, and I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's a normal term for us who work in DAM, but when we're talking to stakeholders, not so much. And so really just setting the baseline that taxonomy really is just that standard set of business language or vocabulary, or even the attributes that we're assigning to our customer and patient content. Now we're talking about DAM today, so that really applies to creative or digital assets. But for pharma, we're also apply taxonomy to our final materials or our composites, and also claims. We have claims library where we need metadata to manage that. And also, even when we're thinking about that DAM 4.0 with the predictive content, modular content, we're also thinking about our taxonomy. And modular content is really just pre-approved blocks of content, which we could quickly assemble into polished assets. But that's really, it's related across all of these areas in the pharma sector. So what is taxonomy and why do we need it when we're having these conversations? I mean, we're all driving towards the adoption of a single harmonized set of business language, right? In order, and how we refer to our patient and customer content. And the consistent application of an enterprise taxonomy is really the strategic enabler, the underpinning for how we connect to the content ecosystem. And it really gives us that ability to maximize the power to deliver that personalized content. There's also the value story here. Again, when you're talking to people who are working in these systems day to day, or the DAM, taxonomy at a very basic level makes it easy for us to find and search assets, give us metrics to maybe even how we're interacting with content, understand how we're reusing content, is a big driver for brand consistency. So that standardized taxonomy is going to make sure that the look and feel of our content is delivering that consistent customer experience. And the personalization, which you'll hear me talk a lot about today. And again, it goes to that ecosystem and maximizing the power to do predictive and personalized content. Metadata really is the foundation that's going to enable that AI and us to be able to figure out what the next best action is with a customer or patient. And then automation, I think, goes a little bit without saying, but again, it lays the foundation for how we're going to deliver content at scale. This is where we're doing these integrations and connecting the content ecosystem with metadata. Now, the thing I like to say to people is, like, metadata seems like a really technical term, especially if you don't work in this space, you know, if you're a marketer and you're in medical. But metadata is really nothing new, and you don't really need to be a technical person to think about how metadata can work for you. And in fact, if you're texting, emailing, getting on the internet, shopping at a grocery store, interacting with retail, going to entertainment, you know, you're always interacting with metadata. And so just setting the scene that metadata is not really a scary word, but it's something that we're interacting with. And so since taxonomy is essentially all around us and used in everyday life, I think this helps set the context, helps stakeholders understand what taxonomy is. And I think using recognizable brands as examples to help medical and marketing teams understand how taxonomy or metadata is used and why they need it for their objectives, right? So let's just take, for instance, a brand like Starbucks. Just on the side of the cup, you can see there are some metadata fields here, right? You've got some attributes, you know, that are being collected. And if you happen to go through the drive-through, this metadata is even automated, right? This is actually a cup this is mine, no rights needed. This is my image, but I get a red eye as much as I can to start my day. Venti, Pike Place, single espresso, etc. But what do you think that Starbucks is doing with all of this taxonomy or this metadata that they're collecting? They're really trying to predict customer behavior, preferences, so that they can align their product activity, maybe how they're developing their products, understanding trends. Another example is Netflix. This is a good example from an international point of view of how metadata, along with customer behavior, either through decision engines or AI algorithms, can generate a list of curated content that's personalized for each customer, right? And in pharmaceuticals, we have the same ambition to automatically assemble relevant content and personalized content so we can deliver those exceptional customer experiences. Really, it's just helping them understand that we are trying to do what they're probably already doing and interacting with in their everyday life. One thing I'd like to call to attention, again, in my experience, is the WiiFM principle. And I've been to some change management conferences, and it's really good to understand how to really communicate with people. Yes, we want to do taxonomy. Yes, we want to connect the ecosystem, but coming at it from an angle of what's in it for them. So the WiiFM principle is a key tenet in change management, and it's how you can get stakeholders to buy into new ideas with taxonomy or go along with you on new ways of working. In my experience, showing up from global, for instance, and saying, you know, we're here to talk to you about this initiative, and it's going to save you time and money. It's going to save the company time and money. But you know what? That doesn't really resonate, as what I've learned over the years. Of course, you're here to save time and money. Why else will we be doing these programs? But really, you should try to get an understanding from their perspective about why they would care about this. Specifically, how does this help them? So if we think about medical or marketing teams, we know that they want to know how content is performing or messaging or, you know, is performing out in channel. That's going to be gained through insights and analytics, which again is underpinned by taxonomy. And of course, from an enterprise level, we're all trying to automate, maximize, and scale content at a personalized level to deliver that omni-channel customer experience. But then also, the reason we're all here working in this space is for our patients and customers, and what they tend to get out of this is the relevant and personalized content delivered to them as much as they need, you know, and in a uniform look and feel, so they have a consistent customer experience across the globe. In other words, the person sitting in France is getting the same customer experience with a specific brand who sits in New Zealand. This is all underpinned by metadata, and this is part of what we try to explain when we go on this journey. So content comes in lots of shapes and sizes, as you may know, but it should be more than just a one-size-fits-all approach. And in pharma, as a lot of industry, we're working better to try to understand our customers, know where they are on their journey, and anticipate that right content, that predictive model of content to best fit their needs at that point in time. Let's look at content from the big picture view, which is really helpful in illustrating why it's important to think about structuring and applying the metadata model with a wider content ecosystem in mind. How do we make sure we're connecting the ecosystem so that we're delivering that personalized content at scale? The answer is enterprise taxonomy. So we need to structure, the structure of taxonomy or metadata is really important, and it's bigger than just one platform. So I manage one platform, but it's aligning and getting together and collaborating with other platform owners so that that data model is applied across the entire ecosystem. The reason we want to be thinking about it at this level is, and again, my experience is that we want to try to avoid the massive amount of effort that goes into cross-mapping these content values between multiple platforms and systems in order to get that big picture view of content performance. And the other thing I just want to take a moment to say is that content should start with a clear content strategy, okay, where customer-centered content is based on customer journeys and persona analysis. And think about it from this point of view. Imagine coming into the DAM and getting a list of content for this customer at this stage of their journey. We're not able to, and we can't enable personalization without metadata, or if we don't have a clear content strategy with content support to support the personalization initiative, right? And the best way we can deliver exceptional customer experience through insights and analytics is dependent on the consistent application of enterprise content taxonomy. In my experience at top 10 pharma companies, the objective is to absolutely move the taxonomy maturity needle. It's hard work, and it's a not so sexy behind the scenes thing, but it is a critical enabler for achieving strategic enterprise objectives. What does this mean? Like, how do we even know if we're moving the needle? So let's look at this taxonomy maturity specification for some criteria. And for simplicity's sake for today's presentation, I really just boiled this down to levels 1, 3, and 5. You would normally have 2 and 4 as well. So for level 1, it's pretty typical, I guess, you know, with that DAM 1.0, you've got a taxonomy happening to some degree for each platform, but it's designed primarily with an IT configuration focus and less about the business value. And you have multiple systems that are using different taxonomies, and this is this is a disconnected ecosystem. So for level 3, this is where we're pretty average. Here you have the formation of some taxonomy structure with assets being tagged and organized to promote a business value like reuse, for instance. And you will have some work where multiple systems are starting to adopt similar taxonomy classifications, but very high level. And of course, level 5 is our North Star. This is where systems are aligned around a single enterprise content taxonomy, which actually can just be a set of core values, which I'll share with you in a moment. So it doesn't have to be a one-for-one across all platforms. And there's some oversight and clear governance in place for managing the taxonomy on an ongoing basis. Here's a couple of design principles I put together for helping guide in designing content taxonomy. A lot of these will be familiar to you, so I don't want to go through each one of them. The ones I do want to mention to you are number 9. Avoid acronyms. This is a big deal in a lot of companies, and everyone who works in those spaces are familiar with those acronyms. When you start to connect the content ecosystem, try to make sure that you're avoiding acronyms so that the values are understood and spelled out because what's known in one platform as an acronym may not be similar to another one. And the other thing I just want to leave you with is avoid values like other, any, and all. These are my pet peeve values, and they have zero currency in terms of metadata. And it really is just giving users sort of a bucket to select something where they don't know. And so try to avoid those values. Things in pharma that I've learned along the way is try to account for taxonomy needs around things like disease awareness or unbranded needs. That's something that should be considered and proactively thought about. And of course, it might go without saying, but bears repeating, different content types require different sets of metadata. So I'm going to leave you with this final note, and then we can get to some questions and answers. And I know this is a very high level presentation. We could go in any level of detail in specific sessions for any of this. But in my experience, it was like, where do I start? And so I recommend taking a very focused approach in managing taxonomy in terms of connecting the content ecosystem. Taxonomy is really a big universe, and it's really not possible and you shouldn't try to reinvent taxonomy all at once. And what I say around my organization is like, we're not trying to boil the ocean here, but figure out those specific areas that support strategic initiatives, right? That's what we're trying to do here. But we're also trying to solve pain points for problems or for users along the way. So for instance, when I talk about different sets of metadata, let's take a component or a digital asset. Maybe we're just enabling users to find assets, but we'll also think about enabling like an intelligent metadata design for a better user experience. So whilst we're doing all this at a strategic level, we can also be doing things where we're creating a better user experience while we're getting better data integrity through the taxonomy model. And what is the minimum amount of metadata that's needed to make informed decisions, for instance, around rights management and to avoid copyright infringement risk? And then for composites, this is where, again, you want to think about a core set of values that you know will be relevant across the other platforms in the content ecosystem. So I just boil it down to what, how, why, and who, and this is the approach I'm in the process of doing at the moment. The material. So what is the material? What is our content and how we're referring to it? Aligning on a set of values that's consistent across platforms, even for just how we're referring to our content. And then how are we delivering content? We want to make sure that we have a harmonized list of or agreed set of values of actually how we're sending this content out in channel. In some platforms can have, quite a few values, and other platforms have very little. And it's looking across the ecosystem to align and harmonize those. And then the why. So what is the purpose of the content? Again, this is another one I've learned over the years where generally people will have a tendency to want to make the purpose together with the material. And from a taxonomy point of view, you really want to start to pull those apart and manage those as separate fields. So like training would be more of a purpose, whereas slide deck would be the actual material, not training slide deck can, all commingled. And then the who, so the target audience, who are we actually sharing this content with? And this can vary quite significantly across platforms, but it's getting together, with those other platform owners and deciding what is the standardized, streamlined list we can all agree our audience is, right? So when we start to pull those insights and analytics, we're not, again, spending lots of time cross-mapping. Well, when you said this over here, does that actually mean X, Y, Z over here? And it's trying, there's a massive amount of work that happens outside of these systems to try to understand, are we all aligned on that value? And again, this all then creates the opportunity for us to be ready for integrations, for connecting those ecosystems. And so finally, what is the process for approaching this? And again, this is the general approach I take is audit the platforms and content out there and try to understand where those master data sources of list values lie, right? In some cases, it might be the DAM that owns that. but it may not be in some cases. Like master data management will have list values that you will want to consume, but not own. And then the other thing, again, just kind of pulling in and thinking about the change management, get around to your stakeholders and get from them what their ideas or needs are, the pain points you can help try to solve for them. This is really go a long way in inspiring adoption and change management when you come to them and the next step is now implement these taxonomy changes. For me, I always look across industry. As I mentioned, I've attended Henry Stewart Dam conferences before, trying to understand what others are doing. Metadata is metadata, really, but the approach can vary by industry. So just be mindful of that. And then again, start small and iterate. We don't have to have 100% ready to go. It's, we can start with 50, 60, 70%. Taxonomy, as I mentioned, is like an ocean, and we don't want to try to all reinvent it all at once. So start small and iterate. So that's my presentation. Thank you. I will turn it back over to Gerard, and I would love to interact with your questions and see where I can help.
Great, thank you, Christine. That was a great way to kind of lay out something very complicated in a very logical way. I really appreciate the way you did that. So thank you. So at this point, we have a few minutes for questions. If anyone does have questions, feel free to enter that into the Q&A tab of this session, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. I know I have a few questions, Christine, that I would just like to start with. My first question is around the team, right? Because Roche Genentech is not a small organization, right? So you own one platform, and you said that you often interact with other platform owners. How does that work from a taxonomy ownership perspective? Is there a governing body that kind of owns this thing and has final say over what changes are made? Or how often do you meet? Or is it all just one-on-one personal relationships? How does this work from a mechanics perspective as it relates to the team?
Yeah, it's early days here. We're really early in the journey. So as a dam owner, I take ownership of driving a lot of the governance and decisions around the taxonomy that's implemented into the dam, but also have a network and a group that we've established to reach out and talk to the other platform owners, right? Because they could very well say, well, we don't want that. We're not going to do it. And often you run into that. And so again, it's taking this story on as a roadshow to say and convince about why they want to align to this. And I think once we get to that level where everybody can align that we want to get at least aligned on that core set of values, right? I think it's also making sure they understand we're not asking you to change your entire taxonomy to match the dam, but we do need to align on those core values. Now, once we get to that, we do have an intent to actually put in some kind of structure that, again, once we stand this all up and get it to a point, we need to make sure there's some oversight and who's governing this, who's leading on those decisions. So we do need to map out the process and what that governing council will look like.
Before we started the session, you and I were chatting just briefly, and we were talking about how we both have backgrounds in where we often find ourselves liaising between business and IT, right? And so I'm curious, in your current role, how do you bring the IT side into play here? Because I imagine they have concerns about making changes to taxonomy and what the trickle down effects of those changes might be. So how do you involve them, keep them involved so that they're not a roadblock and they're actually invested in the process?
Yeah, and my experience, it's a good question. My experience is that IT has really been responsible and accountable for getting whatever the taxonomy values are in these systems to deploy it, right? So through that design stage for deployment. For me, the experience that I have is working around a DevOps model. So it's bringing both the IT guys and girls together with the business side and aligning on, that business as usual process now. So whilst there was a clear role for designing and deploying the system, now there's sort of the business ownership of making sure that the system is groomed, fit for purpose, and meeting like the strategic initiatives. And so really, it's not separate conversations. We meet on a regular basis together, right? So then when we're reviewing requests that either come in from people who have a need or from these strategic angles, we're working together to talk about what is the technical feasibility of making those changes. But again, everybody is part of the conversation along the way.
That's great. So we have a question from Sean, who's wondering if you could give some insight into what is some of the criteria that must be met when someone wants to add a new term to the taxonomy. You know, what's the process there?
Well, I would refer back to the design principles that I mentioned, and I did gloss over pretty quickly. You know, there's some hard conversations that need to happen there in my experience, because people will have a tendency to want to add field values that may actually already exist in your existing taxonomy or your newly designed taxonomy. So the first approach, and again, the way I would manage this in the way that I did, because I was in my previous role had complete ownership and governance of this, is first looking at what the request is, and then do we already have a value in the system that actually meets the need? And if so, going back and talking to the requester that actually we have something there. It's just a little bit different than what you're used to referring to it, but it actually meets the need. Even that can be a hard conversation, but you know, as long as they know there's a value and it aligns to that higher level approach for taxonomy, we're trying to get up and out of the individual needs and thinking about more of the strategic enterprise needs from a taxonomy level. In early days, you'll have a lot of conversations where you've already got something, and it's really just helping them understand there's a term that's created now that's managing that. But in my opinion, after you get past that, standing it up and getting it out there, there's not too much people are coming to you with, and again, I'm speaking more about material types, channels, customers, those core values. There's not much variation that happens after that.
Yeah, great. Christine, you brought up something that is near and dear to my heart. You brought a lot that was near and dear to my heart, I'll confess to that. But the thing that stuck out to me that is often missing from some of these kind of conversations, especially metadata and taxonomy conversations, and that is tying everything back to the user experience, right? Because ultimately the user should be the tiebreaker to any dispute, right? It's like what term best fits the user's needs, right? And so I was really happy to hear you talk about user personas and user journeys. And as we get into as all of our organizations get more and more serious around doing omni-channel correctly, that user journey becomes even more critical than ever, right? So my question here is, how do you at Roche Genentech, how do you get everyone on the same page as it relates to the user journeys, right? And how does that communicated across the organization to say, hey, this is the decision we need to make. We need to make sure it fits this persona, and what you're doing is wrong because it doesn't fit this persona. It's irrelevant to this persona. How do we tie things back to that journey? How do we tie things back to those personas? And how does that just become pervasive across the enterprise?
I think even the questions you're asking are really, really downstream. I think largely the organization has programs and teams in place that are working to identify customer segments and what a customer journey is, right? And that's sort of a separate part of the organization. So we know we've got that happening. It's trying to then align and connect to say, well, while that's very good and we have all that information, and I think this is where I wanted to mention, it's the content strategy. We all think very tactically about, oh, we want to start doing personalization, and we've got the personas, maybe even we have the customer journeys, but you sort of have content that sits over here all by itself. And until we can start to tag metadata that's aligned to those customer journeys and persona metadata, we need to tag the content associated, to that as well. So again, I think here, and I know like a lot of, pharma companies are at different phases with segmentation, personas, and journeys. We're really well on our way in getting all that defined. The next step, and this is where I go out with my roadshow and socialize these conversations to say, again, there's a bigger picture and there's this content ecosystem. So whilst we're all very busy working on our individual initiatives, platforms, and day-to-day, we have to start looking up about how we make these connections. And so ideally, I would love to have those values and create metadata fields in the DAM so that my big dream is that you come into the DAM, you click a button and you say, give me a list of content for this customer on this journey. And so even from a manual perspective, we could start to pull that. And then that's what really sets the foundation for being able to automate AI or decision engines to do that predictive content serving. But we are not ever going to get there unless we start making those metadata tags at the content level. So again, it's me socializing that at a very, you know, I don't want to say nauseating, but it's, you know, you have to keep talking about this to everyone until we can all align. Generally, people understand the vision when you share it with them, but then the next step is that, okay, well, how do we actually operationalize this?
That's amazing, Christine. I'm thrilled that you're talking. Your organization is thinking about that predictive side of the house. You know, that 4.0 world. That, as an analyst, sometimes I get nervous. Right? It's like, I want to make sure that what I'm saying is real, right? Because I hear a lot from vendors who are talking about AI, and I want to make sure that buyers of technology are truly heading in the same direction as what they're selling, right? And to hear that you are thinking about that, I think it's really great.
Oh, we can't do it fast enough here. And again, for me, that's another challenge, is setting the expectation that, yeah, we want to all be doing that, but there's a lot of work to do to get there. And that's really where a lot of the challenge is setting expectation on the fundamental work and pieces that have to be put in place to enable that.
Yeah, that's great. We had a question from Isabella to come in and saying, you know, I think she's getting at it. Can you describe kind of the ecosystem a little bit better from a technology system perspective? Are you using like one omni-channel platform, or are you connecting a bunch of platforms together? You know, in general, how would you describe your overall platform environment?
Yeah. I'm not aware of one big omni-channel platform. For us, it's a lot of because every platform's got their own set of expertise and what they're best at doing. So you will have the DAM sort of as a source of truth of content that I'd like to think of as the sun sits in the middle of this universe. And then you've got, you know, sort of revolving around that, all of the channels, platforms. So you've got anything and how you're delivering content out to customers. And they're meant to do their own, you know, set of expertise in those platforms. And then, you know, and some of that would be authoring tools as well. So while we're not authoring content in the DAM, we also interact with the platforms that are authoring that so that it gets out in front of customers. And so I'm in the process right now of trying to create some integrations with those platforms. But again, there's a big demand and enthusiasm for that. But when we're talking about IT stuff, before we're like ticking the box to say we did an integration, yeah, we can do that. But unless we're working to set up the business process and the metadata that is enabling all of this, we're not necessarily delivering the business value. So from where I sit and where I've come from, they're all individual platforms. They all need to connect at some point. But there's a lot of work to do on how you're making those connections. And again, for me, metadata is always the fundamental about, for instance, just a couple of key terms. So when we're sharing content to the channel platform, what are the key sets of metadata that we're going to align or the same when it gets over there? So those are all the conversations I'm having now. We haven't done any connections yet, but again, that is absolutely the North Star. We need to connect the ecosystem.
I think you're 100% right, and you know, you use the analogy of the sun being in the center here. You know, I think we often talk about it as, you know, your DAM and your content being, you know, one of the building blocks of experiences, right? Alongside with data and alongside with rules and decisioning, you know, that tie this all together. But you're right. In order for any of this to work, the metadata has got to be right, and because that's the stitching that ties it all together. So. Christine, thank you so much for your contributions here today. This was a really great kickoff for the day, and I know you're going to be sticking around for some of the rest of the day. So if anyone has any questions, they can contact you. They can contact you directly via LinkedIn, I assume, and email, or just through the app here throughout the day today. Thank you so much, and for all of you for joining us. And I'll now give my plug for the next session. You know, we have the tech lab coming up with my friends from the Mayo Clinic, and I've had the pleasure of working with them over the years, and they're doing some really sophisticated stuff. They have some really complicated asset types over there at the Mayo Clinic, as you might imagine. So lots of lessons to be learned from them as well. So I'll encourage you all to join me over there and check that out. But we look forward to seeing you on the rest of the day. And again, thank you, Christine, so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It was great.